David here with Figboot on Pens, back again with another fountain pen review. Today I have something rather basic for you. Amazon Basic, to be more precise. Recently, Amazon released a budget-friendly fountain pen under their Amazon Basics in-house brand. I picked one up to see if it was actually worthwhile. Now, I typically discuss price near the end of the review, but I'll let you know up front that this pen was just over $10. $10.11 to be precise. What I'm going to do today is go over the parts and features of the Amazon Basics fountain pen, talk about what I care for and what I don't care for about it. I'll show some measurements, size comparisons, and provide a writing sample. The pen arrives in this generic box. It was nice. In my area with Amazon Prime, this was actually available with free next day delivery. Inside, we have the actual box, which is black, and then inside we have the pen and a couple of Amazon Basics branded black ink cartridges. There is also a use and care guide that comes with the pen, and here is the pen. This is the Amazon Basics fountain pen. It doesn't have a name. On the Amazon site, it is just listed as the Amazon Basics refillable fountain pen. It is a bit on the thin side, and it has a resin cap and barrel with metal trim. For $10, it's not that bad looking. It reminds me a bit of a cross Townsend. Now, I'll show it in the size comparisons, but the Townsend is a little bit longer and the cap is tapered a bit more, but they're fairly similar in a number of dimensions. Let's start by taking a look at the cap. The metal finial is slightly rounded and has a single encircling groove. And this transitions into the clip. On top of the clip, it is stamped with China, which is where these pens are made. Now, I will give Amazon credit here. To the best of my research, this is an original design. When it comes to inexpensive Chinese pens, they are often available under a number of brand names. And I really couldn't find one at all that looked exactly like this model. So, like I said, it might very well be an original design, which is a good thing, as opposed to something recycled and available on eBay for a penny with $1.99 in shipping costs. Here's a look at the clip. It's sturdy and functional, but I have to say that I'm really not a fan of the Amazon Basics branding. It's like when you go into a supermarket and buy the generic brand. You know, it's a white box with just black lettering on it that says rice. You get it because it's cheap, but it doesn't necessarily make you feel good. For me, I think it's just the word basics. It's a word that could have a bit of a negative connotation. If it just said Amazon, then maybe it wouldn't bug me as much. But I'm not here to question Amazon's global strategy in regard to their in-house brand. It's obviously working well for them. I think they're doing okay. The cap tapers up a bit and then straightens out for about the last inch and a half. And then you reach the cap band, which is devoid of any branding. And there's a small step down to the barrel where a small portion of the section is visible. The barrel is straight until about here, where it tapers down to a metal end which has two grooves and is slightly rounded. The cap snaps off, and underneath there is a rather small generic nib. I believe this nib is manufactured in China as well. It doesn't appear to be a Jowo, Bach, or Schmidt design. I'll show you in the writing sample, but I found this medium nib to be remarkably smooth. It's also available in a fine. And here's a look at the plastic feed. The section is metal. It does begin with a very slight ridge and is somewhat steep. A metal section with a high angle of descent is typically not a good combination for me, and I do find this section to be rather slick. It doesn't help that it's fairly thin. For me, I have to apply a bit more pressure in order to grip this thin section, which has a tendency to accentuate the slickness of the metal. Since this is a snap cap, there isn't any threads, but there's a small stair step up to the barrel. If you care for thinner sections, this pen might work well for you. For me personally, I prefer a bit more girth to a section, so I don't personally find this the most comfortable design for longer writing sessions. But for smaller writing bursts, it's a bit more accommodating. The cap does post, and it does post securely. The cap is fairly light, so I don't feel it backweights the pen or throws off the balance at all. This is a cartridge converter pen. It accepts standard international cartridges and converters. A converter is not provided with this pen. This was one that I already had. I wanted to test it out to see the quality of the connection here, and I have not experienced any issues with this converter leaking. You saw in the box it arrived with 2 spare cartridges. There was a third cartridge that was contained within the barrel. Now, I did have an issue with the cartridge which was in the barrel. Here's a picture of it. It was kind of stuck in there. I had to use a small screwdriver to get it unlodged. I can imagine if you were someone new to fountain pens, you would have taken one of the other cartridges, inserted it into the section, and then tried to reattach the section, but would have been a bit confused when there was something in there stopping you from doing so. It might have been a freak thing, but I can imagine folks having issues with it if that was a common occurrence. As I mentioned at the top of the review, the Amazon Basics fountain pen sells for just over $10. I purchased mine for $10.11. I actually checked the site today and noticed they were now selling for $10.49. So, is this pen worth $10? With any extreme budget pen, you're going to have positives and negatives. I think the looks are decent enough. It is well made. It doesn't feel cheap or flimsy. And the nib performance was a very pleasant surprise. Significantly higher quality performance than what I was anticipating. But then on the downside, I'm not a fan of the slick metal section, and the pen is a bit thin for my personal tastes, and I could do without the Amazon Basics branding. But overall, this pen impressed me. I wasn't expecting that much, but the extremely pleasant and smooth nib makes up for a lot of the downsides for me. If you're shopping for a budget starter pen or you enjoy lesser expensive Chinese-made pens, then the Amazon Basics fountain pen is worth checking out. You could do a lot worse than this pen in this price range. I don't regret the $10 I spent on this pen at all. It was a very pleasant surprise. So now it is time for some measurements, size comparisons, and a writing sample. Here we go with some size comparisons for the Amazon Basics fountain pen. As I mentioned earlier, it's somewhat similar in size to the Cross Townsend as far as some of the dimensions, but you can see the Townsend is a little bit longer. Then here it is with a Zhenhao X750, and then here it is with a Pilot Metropolitan. Then in regard to some other pens, here it is with a Lamy Safari, a TWSBI Eco, and then my very first pen that I ever owned that used a converter in bottled ink, which is a Parker Urban. This is the older school model. It's a little bit on the curvy side, but that's what it looks like in regard to the Amazon Basics. In regard to some uncapped comparisons, here it is with the TWSBI Eco, the Pilot Metropolitan, and the Lamy Safari. Here we go with the writing sample for the Amazon Basics. We'll just call it Amazon Basics fountain pen. This is a medium steel nib, and the ink that I'm using today, I figured I'd use a very basic ink, which was actually the very first ink bottle I ever owned, which is Parker Quink. This is what the bottle looks like. I used this with my Parker Urban for quite some time. I got a lot of use out of this ink before, and there was a period of time when I really only used black inks. And then I got really daring and branched out to blue blacks, which was crazy for me because I just stuck with black inks for quite some time. And then I just kind of went off the rails. This is what the ink looks like. It's a nice solid black. It's a little bit on the gray side. Here it is in comparison to Montblanc's Mystery Black, and it isn't quite as dark as something like the Faber-Castell Carbon Black. In regard to the rest of the writing sample, As you might have noticed, this nib is very quiet. It is very smooth. There is just a hint of feedback, but it's very, very pleasant. I was very surprised with the quality of this nib. You're not going to get a lot of line variation out of there, but in regard to this medium nib, there's a decent amount of ink flow there. And in regard to reverse writing, it's a little sharp, but it still gets the job done. And in regard to some fast writing, the feed does a very good job of keeping up. So there we have the Amazon Basics fountain pen. For $10, I think it's a decent pen. And what really makes it is this outstanding nib. So it's worth checking out. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.